Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I will be doing another Top 5 Wednesday. This week's topic are my favorite unlikable protagonists. Before I jump into this week's topic, I just wanted to kind of mention the fact that I skipped last week's. I only want to bring that up because it's going to happen again next week, and the reason for that is that both of those topics have to do with ships or relationships in books. And I have nothing against the topic, I just personally could not come up with a top 5 list. I think it's just the kind of books I've been reading, at least lately. None of them really fit for those categories, and I might have maybe one for the category, but definitely not 5. So I decided, I'm not going to force the issue. I'm just going to leave it undone. That being said, I do hope that in the future that I can read more books so I can participate more fully in these Top 5 Wednesdays. But, just for me personally, ships are not in the forefront of my mind when I'm reading a book. And you will probably find this out a lot on this channel, but I'm just not a huge fan of romance in books, especially when it just involves a bunch of making out and things like that. I personally don't like reading that, and that's just a personal preference. This week's list, and probably all my lists, are not going to be in any order. They're just the order I decide to talk to you about them in. Alright, so that being said, let's jump into my favorite unlikable protagonists. So my first pick is from Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Our main character is Raskolnikov, and he is definitely an unlikable character. He's the one that commits the crime and is trying to avoid the punishment. And what's really interesting about this story and Raskolnikov is that we get to see him before he commits his crime, during the crime itself, and what happens after the crime is committed. And for most of this book, we're inside Raskolnikov's head. So we really get to see what is going on in there, and we get to see why he does what he does. Another reason why I like this book, other than just the premise, is that Raskolnikov isn't just a purely evil person, even though he does something truly heinous. We see Raskolnikov throughout this book give things away to people who need it, and in fact the only money that he actually has was money that his mom sent him. And he finds himself giving this money away to people. And afterwards, Raskolnikov is like, why did I do that? I could really have used that money. And so even Raskolnikov is very confused by his own actions. And I really enjoyed that Dostoevsky has characters that aren't just purely black and white. There's this mixture of gray in between there. We're not really sure how we should feel about Raskolnikov. On the one hand, he does this horrible crime, but on the other hand, he does these truly kind things for other people in need. So I found it to be a really interesting story and a really interesting protagonist, even though he isn't exactly likable. So my next unlikable protagonist is from the book Artemis Fowl by Ian Colfer, and he is of course the titular character. And I say unlikable because Artemis is a 12-year-old criminal mastermind, and he's actually the person that causes the beginning of this story. He kidnaps a fairy, and that obviously causes some havoc in the fairy world, and they try to get this fairy back. And that's kind of the main premise of this first story. I just find it interesting that a book aimed at children has their one child in the story actually be the bad guy in a lot of ways. And not Artemis is truly terrible like a lot of the other people on my list, but he still isn't exactly the good guy. He kidnaps a fairy. That's not exactly nice. And that's not the only thing that he has done as a criminal mastermind. So he's not really likable in that sense. But at the same time, he is really interesting to read about. And I personally really enjoyed this book, even though it's about a criminal mastermind. Okay, so my next unlikable protagonist is from The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, I'm not going to say much about the story at all because I don't want to ruin the story for you, and it's not that long of a story, so I really can't say much of anything without ruining the whole story for you. So the only thing I'm going to say about this book is that it fits this list, and I would recommend it to people. So my next unlikable protagonist is from the book Carrie by Stephen King, and Carrie is the protagonist. Now, I realize that Carrie might be kind of a weird choice. I mean, she's the one that's being bullied unfairly and really hasn't had a good chance of having a good life because everyone, including her mother, just constantly puts her down, and she isn't really able to be normal in that way because she's not being treated like a normal human being. So I must say I did really feel bad for Carrie throughout most of this book. But at the same time, like, I do understand why she was as angry as she was after everything happened, but I still can't condone going on a murderous rampage. So that part is what made her unlikable to me, but I will also say she kind of fits this list because the characters in the story didn't like her much at all. Alright, so the last character on my list of unlikable protagonists is Dexter. This is from the Dexter series by Jeff Lindsay. Now, I will kind of warn you and say that I actually haven't read the books. I've only watched the TV show, and I must say that I really enjoyed the TV show, at least for the first few seasons. It starts to kind of get weird towards the end, but it's still just a really interesting story. So I have no idea how similar the books and the TV show are, but for what I know based on the TV show, it follows Dexter, who is a serial killer. And he works for the police department as a blood spatter analyst. And of course, the twist on that is that he's not just your garden variety serial killer. He's a serial killer who actually only kills people that deserve it, in the sense that these are people who have also committed horrible crimes and are very dangerous, and the justice system, for whatever reason, aren't able to lock them up and keep them away from the general public. They, for some reason, kind of slip through the cracks of the justice system. And Dexter, in a sense, is a vigilante, and he takes care of it and gets rid of them. So it's a way for him to satisfy his urges without just killing random people who don't deserve it. The whole premise is kind of weird to talk about because I personally am not comfortable with even the death penalty, so for me, it's not right to kill anyone for any reason. So even though the people he's killing are bad people, I have a hard time getting behind that. But it really does push and pull you in lots of directions. I'm not sure how I feel about it because on one hand, I'm happy that, you know, this like rapist isn't out there anymore, but at the same time, I can't get behind someone who's killing people. It just doesn't feel right to me. Which is why Dexter is perfect for this list. He's an unlikable protagonist. He does things that I just can't get behind, but he's still an interesting character with an interesting storyline. So he's definitely one of those characters that I really enjoy, in this case, watching, but I can't say that I really like him, especially since on top of everything that he's done, he's pretty emotionally distant. He doesn't feel close to anyone. He just kind of fakes most emotion. You know, he talks about how he doesn't really love anyone or even really know how people do that or how to act normally. He just kind of pretends. So if I was doing an order to this list, Dexter would probably be number 1. Alright, so that was my top 5 Wednesday of my favorite unlikable protagonists. I really enjoyed this week's topic. It was a lot of fun. And I hope to be doing more of these Top 5 Wednesdays in the future. That being said, thank you for watching this video, and until next time,